Three sisters stand before their neighbor, candlelight flickering between them. "We're all virgins," the oldest confesses, her voice trembling. 27, 25, and 23 years old. The youngest steps closer. "We want that to change. Tonight. With you. Together." Greg's wine glass slips from his hand. Before we dive in, comment where in the world you're watching from, and don't forget to click subscribe. Greg Whitmore had learned early that single fatherhood came with a particular kind of loneliness, the kind that settled into your bones after you tucked your daughter into bed and realized you had no one to share the small victories with. No one to laugh with about how Emma had insisted on wearing her tutu to the grocery store, or how she'd declared broccoli the enemy of fun. At 34, he'd built a good life in the quiet suburban neighborhood of Maplewood. His landscaping business was thriving, his daughter was happy, and he'd somehow managed to become the guy neighbors called when they needed help moving furniture or fixing a fence. But on nights like this, standing in his kitchen after Emma's bedtime, the silence felt heavier than usual. He was wiping down the counters when he heard the laughter next door. The Castellanos had moved in 3 months ago, a widowed mother and her 3 adult daughters, all in their 20s, all strikingly beautiful in different ways. Greg had met them during their move-in day, helped carry boxes despite their protests. The mother, Sophia, had insisted on making him dinner as thanks, and he'd found himself at their table more than once since then. They were warm, vibrant, full of life, in a way that made his quiet house feel even quieter by comparison. The oldest daughter, Lucia, had caught his attention immediately, though he'd tried not to let it show. She was 27, with long dark hair that caught the light like polished mahogany, eyes the color of aged whiskey, and a smile that seemed to hold secrets. She worked as a paralegal downtown, dressed in pencil skirts and blouses that somehow managed to be professional and devastating at the same time. But it wasn't just her looks. It was the way she'd crouched down to Emma's level when they talked, the way she remembered details about his business, the way her laugh sounded like something rare and precious. Her sisters were equally striking, but in entirely different ways. Valentina, 25, had a dancer's grace and wild curls she couldn't quite tame. She taught yoga at a studio in town and had that ethereal quality of someone perpetually in motion. Rosa, the youngest at 23, was studying architecture, all sharp angles and confident energy, her auburn hair cut in a sleek bob that emphasized her elegant neck. Greg had noticed them noticing him too. The glances that lingered a moment too long, the way conversation seemed to pause when he walked by, the invitations to dinner that came more frequently. He'd chalked it up to neighborly kindness, maybe a bit of harmless attraction. He was a single dad, not dead, and he'd be lying if he said he hadn't noticed how Lucia's breath caught slightly when he rolled up his sleeves to help with yard work, or how Valentina's yoga pants seemed specifically designed to torture him. But he'd kept his distance, maintained proper boundaries. They were his neighbors. Their mother trusted him. And he had Emma to think about. He couldn't complicate their lives with neighborhood drama, born from his inability to keep his thoughts in check. Tonight, though, something felt different. The laughter from next door was louder, more uninhibited. He caught the clink of wine glasses, the sound of music drifting through the warm summer air. Sophia was visiting her sister in Florida for the week, he remembered. The girls had the house to themselves. He was contemplating going to bed early when his doorbell rang. Lucia stood on his porch, and Greg's breath caught despite himself. She wore a simple white sundress that skimmed her curves, her hair loose around her shoulders. In the porch light, he could see the flush on her cheeks, the slight brightness in her eyes that suggested she'd been enjoying the wine he'd heard. "Hey, neighbor," she said, her voice carrying a warmth that seemed to wrap around him. "We were wondering if you might want to come over. We opened way too much wine, and it seems like a shame for you to be over here all alone when we're having such a good time next door." Greg hesitated, his practical side warring with the part of him that had been lonely for so long. "I don't want to intrude on girls' night." "You wouldn't be intruding," Lucia said, and something in her tone made him look at her more carefully. "We've been talking, actually. About you?" His heart rate kicked up. "About me?" She bit her lower lip, a gesture so unconsciously sensual it sent heat straight through him. "Come over, Greg. Please. We promise we're fun." Something in the way she said it, the slight emphasis on fun, made his mouth go dry. But Emma was asleep, the baby monitor was portable, and he was tired of always being the responsible one, the careful one, the one who never took risks. "Let me grab the monitor," he said. Her smile could have lit up the entire street. The Castellanos' living room was warm and inviting, lit by candles and string lights they'd hung around the space. Valentina was curled up on one end of the couch, her long legs tucked under her, while Rosa sat on the floor surrounded by cushions, her architecture books pushed aside to make room for wine glasses and cheese. "He came," Valentina said, her face brightening. She'd changed from her yoga clothes into a flowing silk top that kept slipping off one shoulder, revealing smooth skin that seemed to glow in the candlelight. "Of course he came," Rosa said, her voice carrying that confident edge she had. Who could resist Lucia's invitation? Greg felt himself being guided to the armchair, the good one, he noticed, the comfortable leather one that had the best view of the entire room. Lucia pressed a glass of wine into his hand, her fingers brushing his in a way that felt deliberate. "We were just talking about how ridiculous it is that we never properly thanked you for all your help," Lucia said, settling onto the arm of his chair. He was acutely aware of her hip pressed against his shoulder, the scent of her perfume, something floral with an undertone of vanilla. "You've thanked me plenty," Greg said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Sophia's cooking alone is worth any amount of heavy lifting." "But that's Mom's thanks," Valentina said. "We wanted to thank you ourselves." There was something in the air, a charge Greg couldn't quite name. The wine was good, rich and full-bodied, and he found himself relaxing into the chair despite the awareness thrumming through him. They talked about easy things at first, Emma's latest adventures, Valentina's new yoga classes, Rosa's architecture project. But there was an undercurrent to every conversation, a weight to every glance. "Can I ask you something personal?" Lucia said eventually, her hand coming to rest on his shoulder. The touch was light, almost casual, but it burned through his shirt like a brand. "Sure," Greg said, though his instincts were telling him he was walking into something. "When was the last time someone took care of you?" Her whiskey eyes searched his face. "Really took care of you? Not you helping everyone else? Not you being the strong one, the reliable one? When did someone last make you feel wanted?" The question hit him harder than he expected. He thought about saying something deflective, something to lighten the mood. But the wine, the candlelight, the way all three of them were looking at him, it stripped away his usual defenses. "It's been a while," he admitted quietly. "How long?" Rosa asked, leaning forward. Her green eyes were intense, unwavering. "Emma's 5, he said. "Her mother left when she was 6 months old. So, about 5 years since I felt anything like that." The silence that followed wasn't pitying, it was something else. Something that made his skin prickle with awareness. "That's too long," Valentina said softly. "Way too long for someone like you." "Someone like me?" Greg asked, trying for humor, but hearing the rawness in his own voice. Lucia's hand moved from his shoulder to his jaw, turning his face toward hers. The touch was gentle but firm, and he found himself unable to look away from her eyes. "Someone good," she said. someone kind, someone who helps everyone but never asks for anything in return, someone who deserves to be cherished. Greg's heart was pounding now. Lucia. We've been talking about you, she continued, her thumb brushing against his cheekbone. All of us, about how you make us feel, about what we want. What you want, Greg repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. You, Rosa said simply. We want you. The words hung in the air between them. Greg looked from one sister to another, seeing the same desire reflected in 3 different pairs of eyes. His mind was racing, trying to process what was happening, what they were offering. This is crazy, he said, but he didn't move away from Lucia's touch. Maybe, Valentina said, unfolding herself from the couch and crossing to kneel beside his chair. Or maybe it's the sanest thing any of us have wanted in a long time. We know what you're thinking, Lucia said, that this is wrong, that it's complicated, that we're neighbors, that you have Emma to consider. We've thought about all of that too. And, Greg asked, his throat tight. And we still want this, Rosa said, moving closer. We still want you. Not forever, necessarily. Not some complicated relationship that's going to implode. Just tonight. Just this. We'll share you tonight, Lucia whispered, her face close enough that he could feel her breath against his lips. If you'll let us. If you want us to. Did he want them? Greg's body was answering that question with embarrassing clarity. But this wasn't just about wanting. This was about 3 women he respected, 3 neighbors he saw every day, 3 sisters who were offering him something he didn't even know how to process. I don't understand why, he said honestly. Why me? Why this? Valentina's hand came to rest on his knee, her touch warm through his jeans. Because you're beautiful, she said simply. Because you're kind. Because we've all been watching you, wanting you, and we're tired of pretending we don't. Because we're all a little broken, Rosa added, all a little scared, all a little inexperienced with what we want. And somehow, you feel safe. You feel right. Greg's mind snagged on one word. Inexperienced? The 3 sisters exchanged glances, something vulnerable passing between them. We've lived sheltered lives, Lucia said quietly. Mom was protective after Dad died. We threw ourselves into school, careers, safe relationships that never went anywhere. We've kissed boys, dated, but we've never... She trailed off, her cheeks flushing deeper. Understanding crashed over Greg like a wave. You're saying you're virgins, Rosa said bluntly. All 3 of us, 27, 25, and 23 years old, and between us, we have exactly 0 experience with actual intimacy. And we want that to change, Valentina said, her hand moving higher on his thigh. Tonight, with you. Greg's breath was coming faster now. This was insane. This was impossible. This was 3 beautiful women telling him they wanted him to be there first, that they wanted to share the experience, that they trusted him with something precious. You've been drinking, he said, grasping for any reason to slow this down, to think clearly. You might feel different in the morning. We've been planning this for weeks, Lucia said. The wine is just courage, Greg, not the reason. We know exactly what we're asking for. Why all 3 of you? He asked. Why not just... Because we want to do this together, Rosa interrupted. Because we're sisters, and we've always shared everything important. Because the idea of doing this separately, of one of us having something the others don't, feels wrong. Because together we feel brave enough to ask for what we want. And what do you want? Greg asked, even though he could barely get the words out past the desire tightening his throat. Lucia leaned in until her lips were almost touching his. We want you to show us what it means to be touched by someone who cares. We want you to be gentle with us. We want you to make us feel beautiful. We want you to be our first, and we want to give you a night you'll never forget." "We want you to say yes," Valentina whispered, her hand now high enough on his thigh that he couldn't think straight. "Please say yes," Rosa added, her voice carrying that same vulnerability he'd seen in all of them. Greg looked at each of them in turn. Lucia, with her whiskey eyes and secret smiles, now open and wanting. Valentina, usually so serene, now trembling slightly with anticipation. Rosa, always so confident, now showing him something raw and real beneath her usual armor. They were offering him something he didn't fully understand, something that broke every rule he'd set for himself about being careful, being appropriate, being the responsible neighbor. But they were also offering him connection, desire, a chance to feel wanted in a way he hadn't felt in years. And they were trusting him with something precious, their first time, their vulnerability, their desire. "Emma," he said, one last anchor to reality. "I have to be able to hear if she wakes up." "The monitor's on," Lucia said gently. "We'll stop immediately if you need to go to her. We promise." Greg exhaled slowly, feeling the last of his resistance crumbling under the weight of their desire and his own loneliness, his own hunger to be wanted, to be chosen. "This stays between us," he said, his voice rough. "No one can know, not for my sake, but for yours, for your reputations." "No one will know," Rosa promised, "and if anyone regrets this tomorrow—" "We won't," Valentina said firmly. "But if we do, we're adults. We can handle our feelings." Greg set down his wine glass with a hand that wasn't quite steady. 3 pairs of eyes watched him, waiting, hoping. He'd been so careful for so long, so responsible, so alone. "Yes," he said finally. "Yes, I want this too." The sound Lucia made was somewhere between a laugh and a sigh of relief. Her hands framed his face, and then she was kissing him, soft and sweet at first, then deeper as he responded. Her lips were wine-sweet, her mouth warm and eager. When she pulled back, her eyes were dark with desire. "Thank you," she whispered. Valentina was next, her kiss, different, slower, more exploratory, as if she was memorizing the taste of him. When she pulled away, she was smiling, that serene expression now edged with something hungry. Rosa's kiss was confident despite her inexperience, her hand tangling in his short hair, pulling him closer. When she broke the kiss, she was breathing hard. "Where?" Greg asked, his voice rougher than he'd ever heard it. "My room," Lucia said. "It's the biggest." She took his hand, leading him toward the stairs, her sisters following behind. Greg's heart was hammering against his ribs. He was about to cross a line he couldn't uncross, about to give these 3 women something they could never take back, about to allow himself to feel wanted in a way he'd almost forgotten was possible. Lucia's room was soft and feminine, her bed large enough for 4, covered in pillows and blankets that looked impossibly inviting. She'd lit candles here too, he noticed. They'd planned this down to the last detail. "We need you to understand something," Lucia said, turning to face him. Her sisters flanked her, the 3 of them presenting a united front. "We've never done this before. We might not know what we're doing, but we trust you to guide us." "And we trust you to be gentle," Valentina added. "But not too gentle," Rosa said with a slight smirk. "We want to feel everything." Greg reached out, cupping Lucia's face in his hand. She leaned into the touch, her eyes closing briefly. "We'll go slow," he promised. "We'll go at whatever pace feels right, and if anyone wants to stop at any point—" "We won't want to stop," Lucia said, opening her eyes. "But thank you for saying it." She kissed him again, and this time it was different. This time it was the beginning of something, not just a promise. Her hands moved to his shirt, fingers working the buttons with trembling eagerness. He helped her, shrugging out of the fabric while maintaining the kiss. When they broke apart, all three sisters were staring at his chest, his shoulders, the evidence of his physical work visible in the definition of his muscles. He was suddenly self-conscious under their scrutiny. "You're beautiful," Valentina breathed. "So beautiful," Rosa agreed. Lucia's hands explored his chest, tracing the lines of muscle, the warmth of his skin. "I've wanted to touch you like this for months," she admitted. Greg's hands found the zipper of her sundress, his eyes asking permission. She nodded, and he slowly drew it down, revealing inch after inch of pale skin. The dress pooled at her feet, leaving her in simple white underwear that somehow seemed more intimate than anything elaborate could have been. "Your turn," he said to Valentina, who stepped forward with that dancer's grace. Her silk top came off easily, revealing a lacy bralette beneath. Her skin was golden, smooth, impossible not to touch. Rosa was last, stepping out of her jeans with confident efficiency, standing before him in black underwear that contrasted beautifully with her fair skin. Greg's mouth was dry. They were stunning, all three of them, different shades and shapes, but equally breathtaking. And they were looking at him like he was something precious, something desired. "I don't know if I can do this justice," he admitted. "You already are," Lucia said softly. They moved to the bed together, a tangle of limbs and touches, exploratory hands and whispered questions. Greg found himself in the center, three women arranged around him, each seeking contact, each learning the feel of his skin against theirs. He started with Lucia, kissing her deeply, while his hands explored the curve of her waist, the softness of her thigh. She responded with soft sounds that sent heat straight through him. Valentina was kissing his shoulder, his neck, her hair trailing across his chest. Rosa's hand found his, guiding it to her hip, teaching him the shape of her. "Tell me what feels good," Greg murmured against Lucia's lips. "Everything," she gasped. "Everything you're doing feels good." He took his time, refusing to rush despite the urgency building in his body. His hands learned the differences between them. Lucia's curves, Valentina's lean strength, Rosa's elegant lines. His mouth followed, tasting skin, finding sensitive spots that made them gasp and arch into his touch. They were responsive, vocal in their pleasure, unafraid to ask for more or to guide his hands where they wanted them. The inexperience he'd worried about manifested only in their wonder, their amazement at every new sensation. When his hand slipped beneath Lucia's underwear, she cried out, her hips lifting to meet his touch. She was already responding to him, her body's reactions betraying her desire despite her inexperience. "Greg," she breathed, "please." "Not yet," he murmured. "Not until you're ready." But she was pulling at his jeans now, her sisters helping, until he was as bare as they were, until there was nothing between them but want and trust and the desperate need for connection. He positioned himself over Lucia first, her choice evident in the way she pulled him down, her legs parting to welcome him. He kissed her deeply, his body poised at her entrance, waiting for her final confirmation. "I'm ready," she whispered. "Please, Greg. I want this. I want you." He entered her slowly, carefully, watching her face for any sign of discomfort. There was a moment of resistance, a sharp intake of breath, but then she was pulling him deeper, her body adjusting, accepting, welcoming him. "Oh," she breathed. "Oh, this is—" He began to move, slow and steady, letting her body learn the rhythm. Her sisters were watching, their own desire evident in flushed cheeks and quickened breathing. Valentina's hand found Lucia's, squeezing in support. Rosa was stroking Lucia's hair, whispering encouragement. The intimacy of it, the trust, the shared experience. It was unlike anything Greg had ever known. When Lucia reached her peak beneath him, her expression was one of pure wonder, her body trembling with pleasure she'd never experienced before. He held her through the aftershocks, kissing her tenderly, whispering praise against her skin. When she finally looked up at him, her eyes were bright with emotion. "That was perfect," she said. "You're perfect." Valentina was next, and she approached with that same grace she brought to everything. She wanted to be on top, she told him shyly, wanted to control the pace. He lay back, letting her straddle him, guiding her hips as she slowly took him in. The pleasure on her face was transcendent. She moved like she danced, finding a rhythm that was all her own, her head falling back as she learned what her body could do, what pleasure she could create and receive. When she finally shattered above him, it was with a cry of amazement, of discovery, of joy. Rosa watched her sister with hungry eyes, her hand between her own legs, her breathing harsh. When it was her turn, she was confident and demanding, telling him exactly what she wanted, how she wanted it. The contrast between her boldness and her inexperience was intoxicating. She took her pleasure with the same focus she brought to her architecture, analytical even in her passion, learning what worked and demanding more of it. As dawn began to paint the sky, Greg lay surrounded by 3 satisfied sleeping women, their bodies tangled with his, their breathing soft and even. He knew this was a moment out of time, a night that could never be repeated, should never be spoken of. But it was also something beautiful. Trust given and honored, desire fulfilled, connection forged in the most intimate way possible. The weight of what had happened pressed down on him, but it wasn't regret. It was awe. These 3 women had chosen him, trusted him with something precious and irreplaceable. They'd given him their first time, and he'd given them pleasure, care, tenderness. It had been about more than just physical release. It had been about connection, about seeing and being seen, about vulnerability shared. Lucia stirred first, her hand reaching across his chest to find her sister. Even in sleep they sought each other out, these 3 who had shared everything. Greg watched as early morning light filtered through the curtains, painting them in shades of gold and amber. Valentina's wild curls were a mess across the pillow. Rosa's arm was thrown across his stomach, possessive even in sleep. Lucia's head rested on his shoulder, her breath warm against his skin. He thought about Emma, still asleep in her room next door, the baby monitor having remained blessedly silent through the night. He thought about how he'd have to slip back into his house before she woke, how he'd have to be dad again, responsible and appropriate. He thought about how he'd see these 3 women every day after this, at the mailbox, in the driveway, through kitchen windows. How they'd have to pretend nothing had changed when everything had. But for now, in this stolen moment, he let himself simply be. A man who was wanted, a man who had given and received pleasure, a man who, for one night, hadn't been lonely. Rosa woke next, her green eyes finding his immediately. She didn't speak, just watched him with an intensity that made him want to look away. But he didn't. He held her gaze, let her see whatever she was looking for. "No regrets?" she asked quietly, her voice rough with sleep. "No regrets," he confirmed. A slow smile spread across her face. "Good, because that was—" She trailed off, seemingly unable to find the words. "Yeah?" Greg agreed. It was. Valentina stretched like a cat, all graceful limbs and satisfied sighs. When her eyes opened, they were bright with happiness. "Morning?" she murmured, pressing a kiss to his chest. "Morning," he replied, his hand finding her hair, stroking gently. Lucia was the last to wake, and when she did, she looked around at all of them, her sisters, Greg, the tangle of sheets and bodies, and laughed, not nervously or awkwardly, but with genuine joy. "We really did that," she said. "We really did," Valentina agreed, grinning. "And it was amazing," Rosa added. Greg felt something loosen in his chest, some tension he hadn't realized he was carrying. They were okay. More than okay. They were happy with their choice, with what they'd shared. "You were amazing," Lucia said, turning to look at him directly. "Thank you for being exactly what we needed." "Thank you for trusting me," Greg replied, meaning it with every fiber of his being. They lay there for a while longer, talking in quiet voices about nothing important and everything that mattered. About how they felt, what they'd learned about themselves, what sensations had surprised them. There was no shame in their voices, no awkwardness, just the intimacy of shared experience, of secrets kept between them. When the baby monitor finally crackled with Emma's early morning sounds, Greg felt the spell beginning to break. "I have to go," he said reluctantly. "We know," Lucia said, but she held him a moment longer before letting him go. He dressed quickly, the sisters watching from the bed, wrapped in sheets, their hair mussed and their lips still swollen from kisses. They looked like something from a dream, and maybe they were. Maybe this whole night had been a dream, and he'd wake up in his own bed, alone as always. But Valentina got up, pulling on a robe, and walked him to the door. At the threshold, she kissed him once more, soft and sweet. "This doesn't have to be weird," she said. "We're still neighbors, still friends. This was just a beautiful detour." "A beautiful detour," Greg repeated, liking the phrase. He slipped out into the morning, the cool air hitting his overheated skin. His house was exactly as he'd left it, unchanged by the seismic shift that had occurred next door. He checked the monitor. Emma was just starting to stir, calling for him in that sleepy voice she had. "Coming, baby girl," he called, starting up the stairs. As he reached her room, he paused, looking back toward the Castellanos' house through the window. He could just see Valentina in the window, watching him go. She raised her hand in a small wave, and he waved back. Then he pushed open Emma's door, letting himself slide back into the role that defined him. But something had changed. Some part of him that had been numb for 5 years had woken up. He'd been reminded that he was more than just dad, more than just the reliable neighbor. He was a man with desires and needs, a man who could be wanted, a man who could give and receive pleasure. "Daddy," Emma said, reaching for him, "I had a dream about butterflies." "Did you?" Greg said, lifting her into his arms, breathing in her little girl smell of sleep and strawberry shampoo. "Tell me all about it." As Emma chattered about her dream, Greg held her close, grateful for his daughter, grateful for his life, grateful for the unexpected gift he'd been given the night before. He knew it was a one-time thing, a moment out of time. But it had been enough. Enough to remind him he was alive. Enough to show him that life could still surprise him. Enough to prove that connection, even fleeting, was worth the risk. Later that morning, after breakfast and cartoons, he took Emma out to the front yard to water the flowers. The Castellanos' door opened, and all 3 sisters emerged, dressed for their respective days. Lucia in her work attire, Valentina in yoga clothes, Rosa with her architecture portfolio. They waved, casual and friendly, as if nothing had changed. "Morning, Greg," Lucia called. "Morning, Emma." "Morning," Emma shouted back, waving enthusiastically. Greg met Lucia's eyes across the driveways. There was something there, a warmth, a knowing, a shared secret that would bind them forever. But there was also normalcy, the understanding that life would go on, that they could all handle what had happened with grace and discretion. "Beautiful morning," he called back. "Beautiful," she agreed, and he knew she wasn't just talking about the weather. As the sisters got into their respective cars and drove off to face their days, Greg stood in his yard with his daughter, the morning sun warm on his face, and felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Hope, possibility, life. Whatever happened next, whatever the future held, he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't invisible anymore. He'd been seen, chosen, wanted. And that changed everything. The rest of the day passed in a blur of normal activities: breakfast dishes, laundry, playing with Emma in the backyard. But underneath the routine, Greg felt different, more present, more alive. When Emma asked him to push her on the swing, he pushed higher than usual, delighting in her squeals. When she wanted to paint, he sat down with her and actually painted, instead of just supervising. "Daddy's happy today," Emma observed, her brush dripping purple paint. "I am," Greg admitted. "Sometimes grown-ups just have good days." "I like when you have good days," she said seriously. "You smile more?" Had he been that obviously disconnected, going through motions without really living? That evening, after Emma was in bed, Greg found himself on his back porch with a beer, looking at the stars. His phone buzzed with a text. "Hi, it's Lucia. I hope it's okay I got your number from Valentina." His heart rate picked up. "It's okay. I wanted to say thank you again, for everything, for being kind, for making last night exactly what we needed." "Thank you for trusting me," he replied. "We should talk about how we handle this going forward. Would you come over tomorrow evening?" He hesitated, then typed, "I'll be there." "Good," came her reply, followed by a heart emoji. He sat there long after, thinking about tomorrow. For the first time in 5 years, he was looking forward to something just for him. The next evening, Greg found himself once again crossing the invisible boundary between his yard and the Castellanos. Emma was asleep, the monitor clipped to his belt, his heart beating just a little too fast. The day had been strange. Every time he'd seen one of the sisters in passing, there had been that moment of recognition, that shared knowledge that made the mundane feel electric. Lucia heading to work in the morning, lifting her hand in a wave that felt weighted with meaning. Valentina doing yoga in their backyard, her movements graceful and deliberate, catching his eye through the fence. Rosa coming home with her portfolio, pausing to call out a casual hello that was anything but casual. Now, as he knocked on their door, he wondered what this conversation would be. Would they regret what had happened? Would there be awkwardness, boundaries that needed establishing? Or would this be something else entirely? Rosa answered, dressed in comfortable clothes, leggings and an oversized sweater that kept slipping off one shoulder. "Hey," she said, her smile genuine and warm. "Come in." The house smelled like something delicious cooking. In the kitchen, Valentina was stirring a pot, while Lucia set the table. They'd made dinner for him, he realized. This wasn't just a conversation, it was an invitation to something more. "We thought we should feed you," Lucia said, turning to face him. She was wearing jeans and a soft blue top, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. She looked younger like this, more relaxed. Seemed only right after everything. "You didn't have to do this," Greg said, but he was touched by the gesture. "We wanted to," Valentina said, tasting her sauce and adding a pinch of something. "Besides, we figured this conversation would go better over food." They ate at the dining table, the four of them falling into an easy rhythm that surprised Greg. The conversation flowed naturally. Emma's latest antics, Valentina's difficult yoga student, Rosa's architecture professor who couldn't make up his mind about her project, Lucia's case at work that was driving her crazy. It felt normal, comfortable, like they'd been doing this for years. It was only after the dishes were cleared and they'd moved to the living room that the conversation shifted. "So," Lucia said, curling up on the couch next to her sisters. Greg sat in the same armchair from the night before, the memory of what had happened making his skin warm. "We wanted to talk about last night." "Okay," Greg said, his voice steady despite his nerves. "First," Rosa said, leaning forward, "we need you to know that we don't regret anything, not a single moment." "It was perfect," Valentina added. You were perfect. But we also know it can't be something that happens again, Lucia continued, and Greg felt something twist in his chest. Disappointment, maybe, though he knew she was right. Not regularly, not in a way that would complicate our lives or risk Emma finding out or create neighborhood drama. I understand, Greg said, and he did. It had been a moment out of time, beautiful but unsustainable. However, Rosa said, a mischievous glint in her eye, Mom is going to be gone for 2 more days. Greg's breath caught. What are you saying? We're saying that last night opened something up in all of us, Lucia said softly. Something we didn't know we were missing. And while we know it can't be a regular thing, while we know it has to end when Mom comes home and real life resumes, we're wondering if you might want to explore this a little more while we have the chance. 2 more nights, Valentina said, and then we go back to being neighbors who share dinners sometimes and wave across driveways. But for 2 more nights, Rosa continued, we could have this, whatever this is. Greg looked at each of them, seeing the hope in their eyes, the vulnerability, the desire. They were offering him something rare and precious, not just physical intimacy, but connection, the chance to feel wanted and to give pleasure in return. What would that look like, he asked. Whatever we want it to, Lucia said. No pressure, no expectations, just being together, talking, touching, learning each other. Emma, Greg started. Is your priority, Rosa interrupted. Always. If she needs you, you go. No questions asked. And after these 2 nights? Greg asked. We figure out how to be friends, Lucia said. Because we like you, Greg. Not just for the physical stuff, though that was amazing. We genuinely like you as a person. We don't want to lose that. Greg sat back, processing. Every reasonable part of his brain was telling him this was a bad idea, that he should establish boundaries, keep distance, not complicate an already complicated situation. But the part of him that had been lonely for 5 years, the part that had come alive under their touch, the part that craved connection and intimacy, that part was screaming, yes. 2 more nights, he said finally. And then we figure out how to navigate being friends and neighbors. The relief on their faces was palpable. Lucia stood, crossing to him, her hand extending. Then come upstairs with us. We have some things we'd like to try, if you're willing. Greg took her hand, letting her pull him to his feet. What kind of things? Last night was about us, Valentina said, standing as well. About our first time, our pleasure, our experience. Tonight, we want to focus on you. On learning what you like, Rosa added, joining them. On giving you the kind of attention you haven't had in years. Heat flooded through Greg's body at the suggestion. You don't have to. We want to, Lucia said firmly. Let us take care of you, Greg. You gave us so much last night. Let us return the favor. They led him upstairs again, but this time the energy was different. Last night had been about discovery, about firsts, about gentle exploration. Tonight felt more confident, more purposeful. The sisters had learned what they liked, and now they wanted to explore what he enjoyed. In Lucia's room, they had him sit on the edge of the bed while they stood before him. There was something powerful about 3 women looking at him with such focused desire, such clear intent. Tell us what you like, Rosa said, her hands going to the hem of her sweater. What you've missed, what you've fantasized about. Greg swallowed hard. I've been focused on being a dad for so long, I'm not sure I remember. Then we'll help you remember, Valentina said, moving behind him, her hands coming to rest on his shoulders. Her fingers began working at the tension there, strong and skilled from her yoga practice. Just relax and let yourself feel. Lucia knelt before him, her hands on his knees. We researched today, she admitted with a small smile. Read some articles, watch some videos. Educational ones, she added quickly. We wanted to know how to please a man properly. Greg groaned, the image of the three of them huddled around a computer, earnestly researching, somehow incredibly endearing and arousing at the same time. You didn't have to do that. We wanted to be good at this, Rosa said, her sweater coming off to reveal a burgundy bra. We want you to feel as amazing as you made us feel. What followed was an education of a different kind. 3 eager students applying what they'd learned with enthusiasm and creativity. Valentina's strong hands working the tension from his muscles. Rosa's confident exploration of what made him respond. Lucia's sweet determination to give him pleasure. They took turns, learning his body the way he'd learned theirs. What touch made him shudder? What words made his breath catch? Where he was most responsive. They were attentive, asking questions, paying attention to his reactions, adjusting their approach based on what they discovered. When Lucia kissed her way down his body, her inexperience obvious, but her enthusiasm unmistakable, Greg had to grip the sheets to maintain control. When Valentina straddled him, moving with that dancer's grace, he lost himself in the rhythm she created. When Rosa demanded something different, her voice confident even as her body trembled, he gave her exactly what she asked for. They learned quickly, these 3. What had been tentative exploration the night before became more assured. They knew how to touch him now, how to move with him, how to drive him to the edge. They worked together sometimes, 2 touching while 1 kissed him, 3 sets of hands exploring simultaneously. Other times, they took turns, each sister claiming her time with him while the others watched, learning, encouraging. The night blurred into a series of moments, each one seared into Greg's memory. Lucia's laugh when she discovered something that made him react strongly. Valentina's gasp of surprise when she reached her peak while moving above him. Rosa's satisfied expression when she managed to make him beg for more. The way all 3 of them curled around him afterward, their bodies soft and warm, their breathing slowing to match his. Thank you, Valentina whispered into the darkness. For what? Greg asked, his hand stroking her hair. For making us feel safe enough to explore this, to want this. You could have made last night feel cheap or wrong, but you didn't. You made it beautiful. It was beautiful, Greg agreed. You're all beautiful. You're beautiful too, Rosa said sleepily. Inside and out. Best neighbor ever, Lucia murmured, already half asleep. Greg lay awake a while longer, listening to their breathing even out into sleep, feeling their warmth against him. He knew this was temporary, knew that in 2 days this would end, and they'd have to figure out how to be just neighbors again. But right now, in this moment, he let himself just be grateful. Grateful for connection, for pleasure, for the reminder that he was still capable of feeling this much, of being wanted this intensely. The baby monitor on the nightstand remained silent, Emma sleeping peacefully through the night, unaware of the shift happening in her father's world. Greg hoped that whatever came after this, whatever challenges they faced in navigating their new dynamic, Emma would benefit from having a father who felt more alive, more present, more capable of joy. The second day was different from the first. There was a comfortable ease between them now, a familiarity that came from shared intimacy. When Greg took Emma to the park that afternoon, all 3 sisters came along, helping push swings and build sandcastles, making his daughter laugh with their silly games and imaginative stories. To anyone watching, they looked like friends, neighbors enjoying a sunny afternoon. But there were moments, a brush of fingers when passing Emma back and forth, a meaningful glance across the playground, a smile that held the weight of secrets, that spoke to something deeper. That evening, after Emma was in bed, they didn't immediately go upstairs. Instead, they sat in the backyard, sharing wine and conversation under the stars. They talked about real things, fears and dreams, past hurts and future hopes. Lucia spoke about her father's death, how it had made her mother overprotective, how she sometimes felt like she was still trying to live up to his memory. Valentina shared her struggle with anxiety, how yoga had saved her, how she still had days where getting out of bed felt impossible. Rosa admitted her fear of failure, her constant need to prove herself, the weight of being the youngest and feeling like she had the most to prove. Greg shared, too, more than he had with anyone in years. About Emma's mother leaving, about the terror of suddenly being a single parent to a 6-month-old. About the loneliness that had become so familiar he'd almost stopped noticing it. About how the past 2 days had reminded him he was more than just a father, more than just the reliable neighbor. "You're remarkable," Lucia said softly. "You know that, right? What you've done with Emma, building your business, being there for everyone around you, it's remarkable." "I'm just doing what needs to be done," Greg said, uncomfortable with the praise. "That's what makes it remarkable," Rosa said. "You don't even see how special you are." When they finally went inside, the energy was different from the night before. Less urgent, more intimate. They made love slowly, taking their time, savoring each touch and kiss. There was laughter, too, when Valentina accidentally elbowed Rosa while trying to change positions, when Lucia got a cramp at the worst possible moment, when Greg's phone alarm went off unexpectedly. But there were also moments of profound connection. When Lucia looked into his eyes while they moved together and whispered, "I see you," and he knew she meant it. When Valentina broke down crying after her release, overwhelmed by emotion, and he held her while her sisters soothed her. When Rosa, always so confident and controlled, let herself be vulnerable, asking him to go slowly, to be gentle, admitting she felt overwhelmed by the intensity of what she was feeling. They fell asleep tangled together again, but this time Greg felt the weight of what was ending. Tomorrow night would be the last. Tomorrow, Sophia would come home. Tomorrow, they'd have to figure out how to be normal neighbors again. The final day felt bittersweet. They spent the morning together, Greg and Emma, the 3 sisters, making breakfast and letting Emma help, which meant flour everywhere and eggshells in the batter, but also laughter and joy. They went to the farmer's market, the 6 of them wandering through stalls, Emma holding Lucia's hand on one side and Valentina's on the other, while Greg and Rosa followed behind with the bags. "They're good with her," Rosa observed, watching her sisters point out strawberries and flowers to Emma. "They are," Greg agreed. "Emma's been happier these past few days. She loves having so many people around who pay attention to her." "What are you going to tell her when this ends?" "The truth, I guess, that you're our friends and neighbors, that we'll still see each other, still spend time together, just maybe not every day." Rosa was quiet for a moment. "Are you going to be okay after this ends?" Greg looked at her, seeing genuine concern in her green eyes. "Are you?" "I think so," she said slowly. "I think we all will be. But it's going to be an adjustment, going back to how things were before, knowing what we know now." "We can't go back," Greg said. "We can only go forward, but I think we can figure out how to do that together." That afternoon, while Emma napped, the 4 of them sat in Greg's living room and had the conversation they'd been avoiding. How often would they see each other after this? How would they act around Sophia? What boundaries needed to be established? They decided on Sunday dinners, a standing invitation for Greg and Emma to join the Castellanos family for dinner once a week. Casual waves and hellos in the driveway, maybe the occasional shared barbecue or neighborhood event. They'd be friendly, but not overly familiar. They'd give each other space to readjust, to process, to figure out their new normal. "And if one of us starts dating someone?" Valentina asked quietly. The question hung in the air. Finally, Lucia spoke. "Then we'll be happy for them, because this was never about forever. It was about right now, about what we all needed in this moment." "But it's going to hurt," Rosa added honestly. seeing you with someone else, knowing they get to touch you the way we have. We might as well acknowledge that. It'll hurt for me too, Greg admitted. Watching you three find relationships, knowing some other man will be the one making you laugh, making you happy. So we'll give each other grace, Lucia said. Space when we need it, support when we can offer it, and we'll remember that what we shared was real and meaningful, even if it couldn't last. That final evening, they didn't rush. They made dinner together, all four of them in the Castellanos' kitchen, cooking and laughing and stealing kisses when the mood struck. They ate slowly, savoring every bite, every moment. They did the dishes together, hands bumping in soapy water, hips nudging playfully. When Emma's bedtime came, all three sisters walked over with Greg to say goodnight. They read her a story together, took turns giving her kisses, told her they loved her. Emma, blessed with a child's adaptability, accepted this new normal without question, delighted to have so many people who loved her. After she was asleep, they went back to the Castellanos' house one last time. In Lucia's room, they didn't immediately undress. Instead, they sat on the bed, the four of them in a circle, and just talked about what these days had meant, about what they'd learned about themselves, about their gratitude for each other. I don't think I understood what I was missing, Valentina said. Not just the physical stuff, but the intimacy, the feeling of being known. I feel braver now, Rosa admitted. Like if I could do this, could ask for what I wanted and get it, maybe I can be that brave in other areas of my life too. I feel less alone, Lucia said simply. For years, I've felt like I was carrying everything by myself, Mom's grief, my sister's needs, my own fears. But these past few days, I've felt held, supported, like I could let someone else be strong for a while. I feel alive again, Greg said. Like I remembered that I'm more than just Dad, more than just the guy who fixes fences and mows lawns. I'm a man with desires and needs and the capacity for connection. You gave me that back. They made love one last time, and it was different from all the other times. Slower, more tender. There were tears mixed with the pleasure, not sad tears exactly, but emotional ones, the kind that come from feeling too much all at once. They memorized each other with hands and mouths, storing up sensations for the lonely nights ahead. They whispered promises to stay friends, to care for each other, to remember this always. When dawn came, they lay tangled together, none of them sleeping, all of them aware that Sophia would be home in a few hours, that this was ending. No regrets, Rosa said finally. No regrets, Valentina agreed. No regrets, Lucia echoed. No regrets, Greg finished. They dressed slowly, helped each other with buttons and zippers, exchanged one last round of kisses. At the door, Lucia took Greg's hand. "Thank you," she said, "for everything." "Thank you," he replied, "for choosing me, for trusting me, for these 3 days." "They were the best 3 days of my life," Valentina said. "Mine too," Rosa added. "Mine too," Greg agreed, meaning it absolutely. He walked back to his house as the sun rose, the baby monitor still silent, Emma sleeping peacefully. Inside, everything looked the same, but Greg felt fundamentally changed. He'd been reminded of his capacity for connection, for pleasure, for joy. He'd been seen and chosen and desired. He'd given pleasure and received it. He'd made 3 women feel beautiful and valued and safe. And in return, they'd given him back a piece of himself he'd thought was lost forever. Later that morning, Emma woke and they went through their usual routine. When Sophia's car pulled into the driveway around noon, Greg watched from his kitchen window as the 3 sisters greeted their mother with hugs and laughter. Sophia looked happy and relaxed, her time with family clearly having been good for her. The sisters caught his eye through the window and waved. He waved back, a simple gesture that carried the weight of everything they'd shared, everything they'd promised to each other. That evening, he got a group text from a new group chat. Lucia, Mom wants to know if you and Emma want to come over for Sunday dinner. Valentina, she's making her famous lasagna. Rosa, fair warning, you'll be expected to eat 3 helpings. Greg smiled, typing back, we'd love to. What can we bring? The responses came quickly. Lucia, just yourselves. Valentina, and maybe that smile. Rosa, speak for yourself. I haven't missed him at all. Lucia, she's lying. She's been moping around all day. Rosa, have not? Greg laughed, feeling warmth spread through his chest. This was going to work. They were going to be okay. Different, changed, but okay. Over the following weeks, they settled into their new normal. Sunday dinners became a highlight of Greg's week. Sophia's cooking, the sisters' banter, Emma's delight at having so many people who adored her. There were moments that were harder than others. When Lucia mentioned a date she'd been on, when Greg helped Rosa move a dresser and had to force himself not to pull her close, when Valentina's hand lingered on his arm a moment too long, and they both had to step back. But there were also beautiful moments. Emma's 6th birthday party, where all 3 sisters helped him organize games and serve cake. The evening Rosa showed up at his door in tears over a failed project, and he held her while she cried, offering comfort without crossing any lines. The morning Valentina texted him photos of a sunrise from her yoga retreat with a simple message of thinking of him. 3 months after their 3 days together, Greg was in his backyard when Lucia came over. She looked nervous, twisting her hands together. "Can we talk?" she asked. "Of course," Greg said, gesturing to the patio furniture. "Everything okay?" "I've been seeing someone," she said, the words tumbling out quickly. "His name is Daniel. He's an attorney. He's kind and funny, and he treats me well." Greg felt the stab of jealousy he'd been expecting, but underneath it was genuine happiness. "That's great, Lucia. Really?" "Is it, though?" she asked, her eyes searching his. "Is it going to make things weird between us?" "Probably for a little bit," Greg admitted. "But I want you to be happy. You deserve to be happy. We all agreed this was going to end, that we'd move forward. This is moving forward." "I feel guilty," she confessed, "like I'm betraying what we had." "What we had was beautiful," Greg said. "But it was also temporary. You don't owe me anything, Lucia. Those 3 days were a gift we all gave each other. But they don't obligate you to a lifetime of being alone." She laughed, but there were tears in her eyes. "How are you so understanding about this?" "Because I care about you," Greg said simply. "And because I meant what I said, no regrets." She crossed to him then, wrapping him in a hug. He held her, breathing in her familiar scent, remembering everything they'd shared while also letting it go. "Will you still come to Sunday dinners?" she asked against his shoulder. "As long as you'll have us," he promised. When she pulled back, she was smiling. "Always. You and Emma are family now." 6 months after their 3 days, Greg was at a neighborhood barbecue when he met Rachel. She was new to the area, a kindergarten teacher with warm brown eyes and an easy laugh. They talked for hours, discovering shared interests and compatible senses of humor. When she asked if he'd like to get coffee sometime, he said yes. He told the Castellanos the following Sunday at dinner. All 3 sisters smiled, assured him they were happy for him, and Emma excitedly talked about maybe having a new friend who was a teacher. But later, as he was leaving, Rosa caught his arm. "Are you happy?" she asked quietly. "I'm getting there," Greg said honestly. "What about you?" "Same," she said. "Valentina's dating someone from her yoga studio. I've been on a few dates with someone from my program. We're all moving forward." "But it's hard sometimes," Greg guessed. "Yeah," Rosa admitted. "But it's also okay, because we have each other still, just in a different way." "In a better way," Greg said. "A sustainable way." A sustainable way, she agreed. 1 year after their 3 days together, Greg sat in the backyard during a particularly loud Sunday dinner. Emma was playing with the Castellanos' new puppy. Rachel was inside helping with dishes, having been seamlessly integrated into the Sunday tradition. Daniel was there with Lucia, his arm around her shoulders, making her laugh. Valentina's boyfriend Marcus was teaching Emma card tricks. Rosa's girlfriend Jen was deep in conversation with Sophia about architecture. Greg looked around at this chaotic blended family they'd somehow created and felt a deep sense of contentment. The past year had been full of adjustments and awkward moments and complicated feelings. There had been times when he'd wondered if they'd made a mistake. But sitting here now, watching Emma surrounded by people who loved her, watching the 3 women who'd changed his life, finding their own happiness, he knew it had been worth it. Lucia caught his eye from across the yard and smiled, that special smile that acknowledged everything they'd shared, everything they'd been to each other, everything they'd become. Valentina blew him a kiss over Emma's head, playful and affectionate. Rosa raised her beer in a silent toast, her eyes warm with understanding. Rachel came out and settled beside him, her hand finding his. "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah," Greg said, meaning it completely. "I'm really okay." That night, after they'd put Emma to bed and Rachel had gone home, Greg stood on his back porch and looked at the stars. His phone buzzed with a message in the group chat. Lucia. "Great dinner tonight?" Valentina. "Emma is getting so big." Rosa. "Rachel seems really good for you, Greg." Greg smiled, typing back. "Thank you for everything, for then and for now." Lucia. "No regrets." Valentina. "No regrets." Rosa. "No regrets." Greg. "No regrets." He stood there a while longer, thinking about the journey that had brought him here. 3 days that had changed everything. 3 women who'd reminded him he was alive, who'd trusted him with their vulnerability, who'd helped him remember he was more than just a father. They'd given him the gift of connection, and in return, he'd given them the space to discover themselves. Now they were all moving forward, building lives, finding love, creating futures. But they'd always have those 3 days, that precious pocket of time when 4 lonely people had found each other and decided to be brave. It had been beautiful. It had been temporary. It had been exactly what they all needed. And Greg wouldn't change a single moment of it. Inside, Emma's monitor crackled with her sleep sounds. He smiled, heading in to check on his daughter, his heart full of gratitude for the complicated, messy, beautiful life he'd built. He paused in Emma's doorway, watching her sleep. She'd grown so much in the past year, more confident, surrounded by love from so many directions. Emma stirred, her eyes fluttering open. "Daddy?" "Just checking on you, baby girl," Greg said softly. "I had a good dream," she murmured, already half asleep again. "What about?" Everyone was together and happy. Greg felt his throat tighten. "That sounds beautiful." "It's real, though," Emma said. "We have so many people who love us now." "We do," Greg agreed, kissing her forehead. "We really do." His phone buzzed, a private message from Lucia. "I know we don't talk about it much anymore, but I wanted you to know. Those 3 days changed my life. Not just because of what happened physically, but because you showed me I was worthy of being chosen, of being desired, of being seen. Thank you for that gift." Greg typed back. "You gave me the same gift. You reminded me I was more than just Emma's dad. You reminded me I was a man with needs and desires and the capacity for connection. Rachel makes me happy, and I wouldn't have been ready for her without what we shared." Lucia's response came quickly. "We chose well, didn't we?" "We did," Greg agreed. He stepped back out onto the porch. In a year, so much had changed. They'd all grown and found new paths forward. His phone buzzed again. The group chat. Valentina. Remember when Rosa tried to make paella and nearly burned down the kitchen? Rosa: that was one time and the fire was very small. Lucia: the smoke alarm disagrees. Greg laughed, joining in. This was what they'd built, not just memories of 3 intense days, but a foundation for real, lasting connection. Later, as he headed to bed, he thought about what Emma had said, about everyone being together and happy. It wasn't conventional, but it was theirs, and it was real, and it was good. The last text came from Rosa. "You're a good man, Greg Whitmore. What you did for us, the way you handled everything with such care, it set the standard for what we'd accept from anyone else. You showed us what we deserved." "You 3 did the same for me," Greg typed back. "You reminded me I deserve to be wanted, to be chosen, to be seen as more than just a dad." "Good night, neighbor." "Good night, Rosa." Greg set his phone down and closed his eyes. He'd been given a gift, 3 days that had changed everything, and he'd honored that gift by growing from it, by letting it teach him, and then by having the wisdom to let it transform into something sustainable. No regrets. Not a single one. As sleep claimed him, Greg's last thought was of gratitude for 3 brave women who'd asked for what they wanted, for a daughter who thrived, for a new relationship full of promise, for a found family that worked, for 3 days that had reminded him what it meant to be alive. In the house next door, 3 sisters were having similar thoughts. Lucia, grateful for love, but never forgetting the man who'd shown her she was worthy of it. Valentina, thinking about how Greg had taught her that vulnerability could be beautiful. Rosa, aware that she'd learned about desire and trust from a generous neighbor. They'd all moved forward. They'd all found happiness. But they'd never forget where it started, with wine and courage and a question that changed everything. "We'll share you tonight." And he'd said yes. And it had been perfect. And they'd all grown from it. The neighborhood slept. The stars shone overhead. And in 2 houses side by side, people who'd shared something extraordinary rested easy, knowing they'd done the impossible. They'd taken a moment that could have destroyed everything and turned it into a foundation for something beautiful. Tomorrow would bring another day. Another Sunday dinner would come. Life would continue its forward march. But they'd always have those 3 days, and they'd always have each other. It was everything.